Imagine being so good at lying that you received medals from both sides of the deadliest war in human history. Imagine creating an entire network of 27 fictional spies, all living solely in your imagination, yet convincing Nazi Germany they were real. Now imagine that your lies were so believable, so meticulously crafted, that Adolf Hitler himself trusted your information above his own generals. This isn't fiction. This isn't a Hollywood script. This is the true story of Juan Pujol García, a man with no formal training, no military background, no connections to the intelligence community, who became the most successful double agent of World War II. The British called him Agent Garbo because his acting skills deserved an Oscar. The Germans called him Arabelle and paid him handsomely for information that would lead them to catastrophic defeat. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. Juan Pujol García didn't just feed false information to the Nazis. He created an elaborate theatrical production, a masterpiece of deception so complex, so detailed, that it required him to invent entire lives, personalities, and backgrounds for agents that never existed. He wrote hundreds of letters. He created fake reports. He fabricated expenses and receipts. He even staged the death of one of his fictional agents, complete with a fabricated obituary. And the Nazis, Hitler's supposedly brilliant intelligence service, the Abwehr, believed every single word. By the time the war ended, Juan Pujol García had accomplished something no other spy in history has ever done. He received the Iron Cross from Germany, one of their highest military honors, and the Member of the Order of the British Empire from King George VI. He wore both medals. He earned both medals, but for completely opposite reasons. The Germans gave him their award for supposedly helping the Nazi cause. The British gave him theirs for helping destroy it. Think about that for a moment. The same man, the same actions, two completely different interpretations, one truth hidden beneath layers of deception. But this story isn't just about medals and recognition. Juan Pujol García's deception directly contributed to the success of D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in military history. His false information kept German reinforcements away from Normandy beaches while Allied forces established their foothold in Nazi-occupied France. Military historians estimate that his work saved tens of thousands of Allied lives. One man, no weapons, no army, just words, creativity, and an absolutely extraordinary commitment to the most elaborate lie ever told. So how did a Spanish chicken farmer with no espionage training become the spy who fooled Hitler? How did he create a network of fictional agents so convincing that Nazi intelligence officers never suspected the truth? And perhaps most mysteriously, why did he disappear after the war, faking his own death and hiding for decades? The answers to these questions reveal not just an incredible spy story, but a profound lesson about the power of information, the nature of deception, and the impact one determined individual can have on the course of history. This is the story of Agent Garbo, the greatest liar of World War II, the man who deceived Hitler.
Barcelona, Spain, 1941. Juan Pujol García was not living the life of a glamorous spy. He was 29 years old, managing a chicken farm, struggling to make ends meet while Europe burned around him. Spain had just emerged from a brutal civil war. The country was exhausted, divided, and officially neutral in World War II, though Franco's government clearly favored the Axis powers. Juan should have kept his head down, focused on his chickens, stayed safe. But Juan Pujol García had witnessed something that changed him forever. During the Spanish Civil War, he had seen what totalitarian ideologies could do. He had seen atrocities committed by both the fascists and the communists. He had watched as political extremism tore his country apart. And now, watching Nazi Germany sweep across Europe, watching Hitler's forces crush nation after nation, he came to a conclusion that would define the rest of his life. Someone had to stop them. And that someone might as well be him. Now, let's be clear about how absolutely insane this idea was. Juan Pujol García had no military training. He had no intelligence experience. He had no connections to any government. He spoke limited English. He had never been to Britain. He was a chicken farmer with a high school education and a head full of ideas from spy novels. But what he did have was an understanding of how propaganda worked, how lies, when properly constructed, could be more powerful than truth, how belief could be manufactured. And he had motivation, pure, burning motivation. He hated fascism. He hated what it had done to Spain. And he was determined to do something, anything, to prevent Hitler from doing to the rest of Europe what had been done to his homeland. So Juan Pujol García made a decision that would either make him a hero or get him killed. He decided to become a spy. His plan was simple in concept, but audacious in execution. He would approach the British intelligence services and offer his services as a spy against Nazi Germany. There was just one problem. The British said no. Juan traveled to the British embassy in Madrid. He explained his plan. He offered to work for them, to infiltrate Nazi intelligence, to feed false information to Germany. The British intelligence officer who met him was unimpressed. Who was this random Spanish chicken farmer? Why should they trust him? What skills could he possibly offer? He had no credentials, no proven abilities, no way to verify his loyalty. The British rejected him outright. Most people would have given up at this point. Juan Pujol García was not most people. He thought, if the British won't hire me to spy against the Germans, maybe the Germans will hire me to spy against the British. And then, once I'm inside German intelligence, I can use that position to offer the British something they can't refuse.
This is the moment where Juan's genius becomes apparent. He wasn't just thinking one step ahead. He was thinking 3 steps ahead. He would infiltrate Nazi intelligence as a pretend Nazi sympathizer. He would convince them he had access to British secrets. He would make himself valuable to them. And then he would approach the British again, not as a random chicken farmer, but as an active German agent willing to become a double agent. It was brilliant. It was dangerous. It required him to deceive one of the most paranoid intelligence services in the world. And if he failed, if the Germans discovered his true intentions, he would be tortured and executed. But Juan Pujol García had made his decision. In early 1941, he walked into the German embassy in Madrid. He told them he was a Spanish government official with access to sensitive information and diplomatic connections. He told them he admired the Nazi cause. He told them he had contacts in London who could provide valuable intelligence. He told them he wanted to spy for Germany. All of this was a lie. He was a chicken farmer with no government position, no diplomatic connections, and no contacts in London. But he sold it, with confidence, with conviction, with carefully crafted details. And remarkably, the Germans believed him. The Abwehr,
Nazi Germany's intelligence service recruited Juan Pujol García. They gave him training in secret writing, invisible ink, and intelligence gathering. They gave him a code name, Arabelle. They gave him money for expenses. And they gave him a mission. Travel to Britain. Gather intelligence on Allied military operations. Report back everything you discover. There was just one small problem with this plan. Juan Pujol García never went to Britain. He couldn't. He didn't have a visa. He didn't have the connections to get one. Britain was at war, and they weren't exactly handing out travel permits to Spanish civilians. So instead, he went to Lisbon, Portugal. And from a small room in Lisbon, using travel guides, magazines, newspapers, and a map of Britain, Juan Pujol García began sending intelligence reports to Nazi Germany. Reports about British military movements, reports about troop deployments, reports about naval operations, all completely fabricated, all created from his imagination, tourist guidebooks, and news articles. And somehow, impossibly, the Germans believed he was actually in Britain.
Lisbon, Portugal, 1941 to 1942. In a modest room, with nothing but newspapers, travel guides, and pure imagination, Juan Pujol García began constructing the most elaborate deception of World War II. His challenge was monumental. He had to convince Nazi intelligence that he was living in Britain, even though he had never set foot there. He had to provide military intelligence that seemed valuable and authentic, even though he had no actual access to any real information. He had to create reports detailed enough to seem credible, but not so accurate that they would actually help the German war effort. It was a tightrope walk over a pit of certain death. One mistake, one inconsistency, one detail that revealed his deception, and he would be exposed. So Juan did what any great spy novelist would do. He created characters. His first fictional agent was supposedly a KLM airline employee who traveled frequently and could observe military movements, completely invented. His second was a Swiss businessman in Liverpool with access to port information, never existed. His third was a Venezuelan student living in Glasgow, pure fiction. Over time, Juan's network grew. He created a Portuguese businessman in Newport, a Greek seaman working in Britain, a Welsh nationalist who supposedly hated the English government. 27 agents in total, each with detailed backgrounds, personalities, motivations, and areas of expertise. None of them real. Juan gave them names, occupations, families, personal problems. He wrote their reports in different styles to reflect their different personalities. He created correspondence between them. He tracked their expenses and submitted receipts. He was writing a novel in real time, and the Nazis were his readers, believing every word was non-fiction. But creating characters wasn't enough. Juan needed to provide information that seemed valuable, intelligence that the Abwehr would consider worth paying for. So he studied British newspapers available in Lisbon. He read articles about military movements, but the details were always vague due to wartime censorship. Juan would take these vague reports and add specific details. A newspaper might mention naval activity in the North Atlantic. Juan would send a report with specific ship names, convoy routes, and departure times, all completely made up, but sounding authentic. Here's where his genius becomes apparent. Juan deliberately made small mistakes in his reports. He confused British currency. He described locations incorrectly. He made scheduling errors that showed he didn't actually understand how British society worked. Why would he do this? Because these mistakes made him seem more authentic.
A German intelligence officer, reviewing his reports, would think, "This agent is clearly actually in Britain gathering real information, but he's Spanish and doesn't fully understand British customs yet." These small errors prove he's not a British double agent feeding us false information, because a British agent wouldn't make these specific mistakes. The errors became proof of authenticity. It was psychological warfare at its finest. But Juan faced a growing problem. His reports were being taken seriously by the Abwehr, they were paying him well, they trusted him. But the information he was sending, while false, was sometimes accidentally close to real British military activities, and if any of his false reports actually helped the Germans, he would be responsible for Allied deaths. This terrified him. He needed to get to the real British intelligence services. He needed to coordinate with them so his false information could be controlled and deliberately crafted to mislead the Germans without accidentally providing any real value. So in February 1942, Juan tried again. His wife, Araceli, went to the American embassy in Lisbon. She explained that her husband was a German agent sending false information to the Nazis, and he wanted to work with the Allies. The Americans thought she was insane, or possibly a German trick. They rejected her. But they mentioned the encounter to British intelligence. And British intelligence, unlike the Americans, got very interested very quickly. By this point, British counterintelligence had noticed something strange. They were intercepting German communications that referenced an agent called Arabelle. This agent was supposedly in Britain, sending regular intelligence reports. But British intelligence knew every German spy operating in Britain. They had rolled up every German network. They had turned or captured every agent. So who was Arabelle? Where were these reports coming from? They couldn't find him. They couldn't identify him. And this terrified them. An unknown German agent operating successfully in Britain was a massive security threat. British intelligence, MI5, launched an intensive investigation to find Arabelle. They searched everywhere. And then they heard about a Spanish man in Lisbon whose wife claimed he was a German agent deliberately feeding false information. The pieces clicked into place. Arabelle wasn't in Britain. He was in Lisbon, pretending to be in Britain. And remarkably, it was working. In April 1942, British intelligence officer Tommy Harris made contact with Juan Pujol García in Lisbon. They met, they talked. Tommy Harris reviewed Juan's reports to the Germans, and Tommy Harris realized he was dealing with either a madman or a genius. The level of detail, the creativity, the psychological sophistication of Juan's deception was extraordinary. Here was a man with no training who had single-handedly created a fictional spy network so convincing that Nazi intelligence had completely bought into it. Tommy Harris made a decision that would change the course of the war. He brought Juan Pujol García to Britain. The chicken farmer was finally going to the country he had been pretending to live in for over a year. The British gave him a new code name. They called him Garbo, because his performance deserved an Oscar. And now, with the full resources of British intelligence behind him, Juan Pujol García's theatrical production was about to become spectacular.
London, England, 1944. The most important military operation of World War II was being planned. Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion. 156,000 Allied troops would land on the beaches of Normandy, France, beginning the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi occupation. But the invasion's success depended on one critical factor: surprise. If the Germans knew where and when the invasion would happen, if they concentrated their forces at Normandy, the beaches would become a slaughterhouse. The invasion could fail. The war could drag on for years. Tens of thousands of additional lives would be lost. The Allies needed the Germans to believe the invasion would happen somewhere else, and for this deception, they turned to Agent Garbo. By 1944, Juan Pujol García had become British intelligence's most valuable asset. Working from London with his MI5 handler Tommy Harris, Juan had expanded his fictional spy network to 27 imaginary agents spread across Britain. The Germans trusted him completely. His reports were being read by Hitler himself. The Führer personally commended the intelligence coming from Agent Garbo. Nazi military planning incorporated information from Juan's reports. They had no idea, absolutely no idea, that everything was fiction. Now, British intelligence needed Juan to pull off the greatest deception of his career. Operation Fortitude was the code name for the D-Day deception plan. The goal was to convince the Germans that the invasion would happen at Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, about 200 miles northeast of the real target at Normandy. Multiple deception tactics were employed. Fake army units with inflatable tanks and aircraft were stationed near Dover, across from Calais, to be spotted by German reconnaissance. False radio traffic suggested massive troop concentrations in southeast England. Dummy landing craft filled British harbors. But all of this physical deception needed to be reinforced with intelligence reports that seemed to independently confirm what German surveillance was detecting. This is where Garbo became essential. Juan and Tommy Harris crafted a series of reports from Juan's fictional agents that painted a detailed picture of Allied preparations, all pointing toward Pas de Calais. His imaginary agent in Dover reported seeing massive troop buildups. His fictional Welsh nationalist reported overhearing soldiers talking about crossing at the narrowest point of the channel. His invented Venezuelan student in Glasgow reported watching divisions of the real U.S. First Army Group preparing for deployment. Except this entire army group was fake, commanded by General Patton as part of the deception. Every report was carefully calibrated. Some information was actually true to maintain credibility. Some was false to mislead. All of it supported the lie that the invasion would happen at Calais. But here's where Juan and Tommy Harris pulled off a masterstroke of deception. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, as Allied forces landed on Normandy, Juan sent an urgent message to his German handlers. The message said that his agents had finally pieced together the truth. The Normandy landing was happening right now. Think about that timing. Juan sent this message after the invasion had already begun. Why would he do this? Wouldn't this warn the Germans? No, because by the time the message was sent, German forces already knew about Normandy. Allied troops were already on the beaches. But by sending the message, Juan accomplished something brilliant. He proved to the Germans that his network had accurately detected the invasion. Even though he reported it too late to be useful, the report was true. This reinforced German trust in his network. The Germans thought Adelbel's information was correct. He really does have sources inside Allied command. Unfortunately, his message arrived too late for us to act on it, but he clearly has excellent intelligence access. This set up the second phase of the deception. On June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, Juan sent another urgent message. This message claimed that his network had uncovered the real Allied plan. According to Juan's fictional sources, the Normandy invasion was just a diversion. The real invasion, the main attack with the bulk of Allied forces, was still coming at Pas de Calais. The Germans had to keep their reserve forces positioned to defend Calais. They couldn't send reinforcements to Normandy because the real invasion hadn't happened yet. This was the lie that changed history. And the Germans believed it. Hitler himself believed it. He ordered significant forces to remain at Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. For 7 critical weeks after D-Day, German reinforcements that could have pushed the Allies back into the sea were held at Pas de Calais, waiting for Agent Garbo's main invasion. By the time the Germans realized the truth, Allied forces had secured Normandy and were breaking out across France. The deception had worked. Military historians have analyzed the impact of Operation Fortitude and Agent Garbo's role. The consensus is clear. By keeping German reinforcements away from Normandy during those critical first weeks, the deception saved somewhere between tens of thousands to possibly over 100,000 Allied lives. One man, sitting at a desk in London, writing fictional reports, changed the outcome of the most important military operation of the 20th century. But the story doesn't end there, because the Germans still didn't know they had been deceived. They still trusted Agent Garbo completely. And as a reward for his supposedly excellent intelligence work, in July 1944, Nazi Germany awarded Juan Pujol García the Iron Cross Second Class, one of Germany's highest military honors, awarded to the man who had just helped ensure their defeat. Juan must have experienced a moment of profound satisfaction when he learned about this award. The Nazis were pinning a medal on the chest of their own destroyer. But Juan couldn't celebrate publicly. His work was still secret. The war was still ongoing. And British intelligence had more work for Agent Garbo. After D-Day, Juan continued sending reports to the Germans, carefully feeding them false information about Allied plans, keeping them confused and off balance. He continued this work until the very end of the war in May 1945. Even as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, even as Hitler's regime collapsed, the Germans still trusted Agent Garbo. They never discovered the truth.
June 1944. While Allied soldiers fought and died on Normandy beaches, while the fate of Europe hung in the balance, Nazi Germany made a decision that would have been comical if the circumstances weren't so serious. They decided to honor Agent Garbo. In recognition of his supposedly invaluable intelligence work, the German High Command awarded Juan Pujol García the Iron Cross Second Class. This wasn't a participation trophy. This was one of Nazi Germany's highest military decorations, awarded for exceptional bravery or service to the Reich. Previous recipients included fighter pilots who had shot down dozens of enemy aircraft, tank commanders who had led successful operations against Allied forces, soldiers who had demonstrated extraordinary courage under fire, and now a Spanish chicken farmer sitting in a London office making up stories. The award citation specifically praised his intelligence reporting that had supposedly helped Germany understand Allied invasion plans. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The Germans were literally thanking Juan for the deception that was helping to destroy them. But Juan couldn't exactly display this medal publicly. He was in Britain. The war was still ongoing. His identity as Agent Garbo was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. So the Iron Cross was sent to him through secret channels. He received it, he acknowledged it, and he kept working. The question that has fascinated historians ever since is simple. How did the Germans never suspect? How did Nazi intelligence, supposedly among the most sophisticated in the world, never realize that Agent Garbo's entire network was fictional? The answer reveals something profound about human psychology and the nature of deception. First, confirmation bias. The Germans wanted to believe that they had a highly placed agent in Britain. It confirmed their worldview that they were winning the intelligence war. It made them feel secure. Juan's reports told them what they wanted to hear. Not always good news, but news that fit their existing assumptions about Allied capabilities and intentions. Second, the detail. Juan's reports were incredibly detailed. Specific dates, locations, unit designations, personal names. This level of specificity suggested real intelligence gathering, not fabrication. What the Germans didn't know was that Juan was creating all these details from his imagination, from newspapers, from educated guesses, and then carefully tracking every detail so his lies remained consistent. Third, the mistakes. Juan deliberately included small errors in his reports, currency confusions, minor geographic mistakes. These errors actually reinforced belief in his authenticity because they seemed like the kinds of mistakes a Spanish agent working in Britain would make. Fourth, validation. Occasionally, Juan's fabricated reports would accidentally align with real events. When this happened, the Germans would think, his information was correct. He clearly has real sources. What they didn't realize was that given the volume of Juan's reporting, occasional alignment with reality was statistically inevitable. And finally, the critical factor. Tommy Harris. Juan's British handler was himself a genius of psychological manipulation. Tommy Harris had studied German intelligence methods. He understood how German officers thought. He helped Juan craft reports that would push specific psychological buttons in the German mindset. Together, Juan and Tommy created a deception so sophisticated that it operated not just on the level of false information, but on the level of psychological manipulation. They weren't just lying to the Germans. They were giving the Germans exactly what they needed to believe in order to lie to themselves. When the war ended in May 1945, the extent of Agent Garbo's deception was finally revealed to a very small circle of British and Allied intelligence officials. And they were stunned. British intelligence recommended Juan Pujol García for a formal honor. In November 1945, King George VI awarded Juan the Member of the Order of the British Empire. The MBE is a significant British honor, awarded to individuals who have made major contributions to the nation. The citation mentioned his contributions to the war effort, though the full details remained classified for decades. So now Juan had two medals: the Iron Cross from Nazi Germany, the MBE from Great Britain. He was quite literally the only person in World War II to receive military honors from both sides. Both medals were earned for the exact same actions, the same lies, the same reports, the same fictional spy network, but interpreted completely differently by the two sides. The Germans thought he was helping them.
The British knew he was helping them. Both were absolutely certain they were right. Only one of them actually was. This is the ultimate achievement of a double agent. Not just to serve both sides, but to be recognized and honored by both sides, while only truly serving one. But for Juan Pujol García, the end of the war didn't bring celebration or recognition. It brought something else entirely. A problem. Because the Germans still didn't know the truth. German intelligence officers who had survived the war, who had worked with Agent Garbo, still believed he was real. Some of them had escaped justice. Some were in hiding. Some might seek revenge if they ever discovered how completely they had been deceived. And Juan had a family to protect. His wife Araceli, his children. If former Nazi intelligence officers learned that the man they trusted, the man they honored with the Iron Cross, had been systematically lying to them throughout the war, they would come for him. So British intelligence made a recommendation. Juan Pujol García needed to disappear. Not just leave Britain, not just change his name. He needed to cease to exist entirely. And that's exactly what he did.
1949. Angola, Africa. The death notice was brief. Juan Pujol García, former Spanish citizen, had died of malaria in Angola while working for a trading company. His wife confirmed it. Documents were filed. A death certificate was issued. The man who had deceived Hitler was dead. Except he wasn't. Juan Pujol García had faked his own death. With the help of British intelligence, he had created an elaborate fiction to explain his disappearance. The death certificate, the location, the cause of death, all carefully crafted details designed to close the book on his existence. In reality, Juan had moved to Venezuela. He settled in Caracas, started a small business, and lived under a new identity. He told no one about his past, not his neighbors, not his business associates, not even his children knew the full truth. The man who had created 27 fictional spies became a fiction himself. For nearly 30 years, the world believed Juan Pujol García was dead. British intelligence kept his story classified. The files remained sealed. Historians knew there had been a deception operation around D-Day, but the details were murky. Agent Garbo became a ghost story, a legend whispered about in intelligence circles but never confirmed. Juan lived quietly in Venezuela. He ran his bookstore. He raised his family. He watched the world change. And he kept his secret. But here's the thing about extraordinary stories. Eventually, they want to be told. In 1984, nearly 40 years after the end of World War II, a writer named Nigel West was researching the history of British counterintelligence. He had come across references to Agent Garbo in newly declassified documents. The documents suggested that Garbo had perhaps been the most successful double agent of the war, but they didn't reveal his real identity or what had happened to him after the war. Nigel West became obsessed with finding the truth. He investigated. He interviewed former MI5 officers. He tracked down leads. And eventually, he discovered that the death in Angola might have been faked. He found traces suggesting Juan Pujol García might still be alive in Venezuela. In 1984, Nigel West traveled to Caracas, and he found him. Juan Pujol García, now 72 years old, still alive, still keeping his secret. When Nigel West approached him and asked if he was Agent Garbo, Juan initially denied it. Old habits die hard.
The instinct for secrecy ran deep. But eventually, Juan agreed to tell his story. He had been silent for decades. He had watched the world misunderstand the war, seen incorrect histories published, heard people speculate about intelligence operations without knowing the truth, and he was tired of silence. In 1984, Juan Pujol García gave his first interviews about his wartime work. The story that emerged was so extraordinary that many people initially didn't believe it. A chicken farmer with no training had fooled Nazi intelligence for 4 years, had created 27 fictional spies that the Germans believed were real, had directly influenced the success of D-Day. It seemed too incredible to be true. But the documents supported it. Former MI5 officers confirmed it. The German intelligence records, once they were examined, showed exactly how thoroughly they had been deceived. In 1984, 39 years after the end of the war, Juan Pujol García finally received public recognition. He was invited to London. He visited the cabinet war rooms, the underground bunkers where Churchill had directed the British war effort. He met with intelligence historians and shared details of his operation. And he walked along the streets of the city he had once pretended to live in, now finally able to visit openly as himself. Juan Pujol García died in October 1988 in Caracas, Venezuela. He was 76 years old. By the time of his death,